Hey there, and welcome to That Bond Show, the internet's #1 James Bond rewatch show, hosted by two guys named Logan and Trevor. Probably. I am one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson, and joining me on this journey is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey. Join us as every week we discuss a new Bond movie from Dr. No to No Time to Die. On this week we have Thunderball. Trevor, I'm gonna assume, like every episode so far this series run, you don't have a ton of familiarity with Thunderball.
Nope. My biggest the thing I know about Thunderball is the joke from ERB Epic Rap Battles, where they talk about you made Thunderball 2 bloody times, and that's about all I know. Sure. Yeah, this was my first time sitting down watching it. I don't know if the quote unquote other incarnation of Thunderball is one that we'll end up getting to, or if that's one of the unofficial ones.
We might do like a special bonus episode of Never Say Never Again.
I'd rather not. If it's not movie. in the like the normal lineage of things, I'd rather not have to try and hunt that down. But yeah, that's pretty much all I know about Thunderball, is that there was like this weird legal turmoil or whatever in who had the rights. Yeah. So it gets made now and then again later.
Yeah. We're doing Thunderball on this week's episode of the show. It is one of the weirder behind the scenes production, I think, certainly of the early Bond movies, because it is so embroiled in so many legal disputes and complications from that, and conflicting things of who created what and who did what with all the characters. And we'll get into that a little bit later on. But for me, I really liked Thunderball as a kid, which we've talked about before. I think there is just something to the movie. There's a lot that isn't great in the movie, but I think as like an 8-year-old kid, right? Like, I loved the Spectre storyline, as I've talked about, on this podcast before. I think Thunderball gives you a lot of that. I think it gives you a lot more fleshed out of what that organization looks like, of kind of the hierarchy of the team behind Spectre. You get more of Blofeld. You get the number 2 guy in the organization, which I always thought was so cool, in Emilio Largo as the bad guy. It is the first Bond movie that really has a femme fatale villain, right, as well. And she's great, right? Like, she's super cool in her own right. And then it is just sort of a ridiculous movie, right? Like, it's really interesting to watch all of these back to back to back and see the evolution, see the growth from one to the other. Whereas this movie had, a bigger budget than all the other 3 combined. And what it did with that money could be questionable at times. I think we'll get into for sure. But I don't know. Thunderball is slow, and it can be plodding, and there is an entire act that is questionable, and maybe 2 really. But I just find it really charming. I love the idea that they basically were tasked with, how do we follow up, what will go down as one of the most critically acclaimed entries in the entire series, one of the most critically acclaimed and popular movies ever. What do we do to, follow that up? And they went in such a weird direction that is not where I probably would have done to follow up Goldfinger in terms of style and tone and substance. But I think in being so different than Goldfinger, it sort of works, and it not being an easy comparison for the two. And yeah, I don't know, there is something charming in Thunderball's ambitions for me. And it, spoiler alert, will not be my favorite movie that we've done so far. But it's not my least favorite either. And yeah, I'm excited to kind of dive through everything Thunderball here. But before we get to that, we've got the regular rigmarole to get through here. Thunderball was released on December 29th. It just made the cutoff. 1965. This is the first movie in the Bond series where the London premiere was actually not the first premiere. It premiered in Tokyo a couple weeks before it premiered in the UK. This was the 4th Bond movie. In terms of the star and cast, we have yet again Sean Connery as James Bond in his fourth outing in the role. Fourth in 4 years. They were cranking these first 4 ones out real quick. They hadn't missed a year yet. Yes, we have Sean Connery back as James Bond. We have Claudine Auger as Domino. We have Adolfo Cieli as Emilio Largo, or number 2, if you're using Spectre parlance. We have Luciana Pulazzi, I'm going to go with, as Fiona Volpe. Rick Van Nutter, we'll get into him for sure, as Felix Leiter. He's in the top 2 Felix Leiters I most forget about. He is incredibly forgettable and bland, but he will get his moment in the sun, don't worry, in this episode. We've got Martine Beswick as Paula, Paul Stesiano as Francois Duval, or Angelo, depending on which character we're looking at here. And then we got the old guard here of Lois Maxwell as Moneypenny, Desmond Llewellyn as Q, and Bernard Lee as M. This movie was directed by Terrence Young, who had previously done Dr. No and From Russia with Love. It would be Terrence Young's third and final Bond movie. And it should be mentioned, I didn't put this in here because it's not really a cast thing, but Ken Adams, who had done the production design of both Dr. No and Goldfinger, and who would continue to be a recurring feature of the Bond series, came back into the production design for Thunderball as well. In the blast from the past section, the president was LBJ. I changed it up a little bit here to show you how old the Bond series is. My grandfather on my mother's side was all of 27 years old when this movie came out. He is 83 now, to put that in context of how long James Bond has existed. The highest grossing movie of the year was The Sound of Music, which is totally fair. That is a classic. If a movie we probably will never do on that D Plus show because it is unimaginably long.
It's what we looked at once.
We did
at one point, and then it was like, that's a really long movie. Let's not do that.
So long.
I imagine it'll happen at some point down the line. But yeah, it'll be like a. We'll have to do like a dedicated like musicals month or something like that to like
which could be really
prepare
fun
for the time of it.
Yeah. Thunderball was the third highest grossing movie in the US. It was the highest grossing movie in the UK, as you will get to a little bit later. My favorite current segment is the Boston Celtics continuing to win NBA titles, won their 7th straight NBA title this year. And they would still win one more after this. Just dominated in the early league. And in our What Were the Beatles Doing segment, the Beatles released Rubber Soul and I believe Revolver, if I'm not mistaken, this year, both of which are fantastic albums. That's a great question. I think the Beatles also might have performed live for the last time, aside from the rooftop concert in 1965 as well, or it might have been early 1966, but it's right around this time period that they stopped performing live as well. Trevor looks like he's doing the research on that. The trivia section is where we'll jump to next while Trevor does that. Like I kind of alluded to, Thunderball was a massive box office success, earning more than all of the prior Bond films combined at the box office. Indeed, it would earn more than the next 5 Bond movies to follow it. And when adjusted for inflation, it remains the second highest grossing Bond movie of all time, grossing over $1 billion in adjusted box office, ranking it just behind Skyfall within the Bond series. Yes, the sheer level of box office record-breaking status that Thunderball had cannot be understated enough. Until 2012, it was the highest rated Bond movie ever when adjusted for inflation, until Skyfall came out. Trevor, what do you got?
So the Beatles' final tour was in 1966, with a performance in August of in San Francisco.
San Francisco, yeah.
And then that rooftop performance was a few years later, actually, 1969.
Yep. So yeah, one more year the Beatles performing live when this happened. Yes, Thunderball was a huge box office success. We don't talk about the UK stats here because we don't care about the Brits. Just kidding. But it was the highest grossing movie in the UK that year. Or I guess it would have been 1966. It would have been the highest grossing movie. Because they came out with 3 days. Now fun for all of the fun legal trivia nonsense craziness of Thunderball. It is a huge section of the trivia doc here. Thunderball was originally conceived as the first James Bond film. But due to it being the center of multiple legal disputes that began in 1961 and would run on and off again until 2006, and a little bit later, when doing my own research on this, basically the crux of the legal dispute comes down to former Ian Fleming collaborators Kevin McClory and Jack Whittingham suing Ian Fleming shortly after the 1961 publication of the Thunderball novel, claiming he based it upon the screenplay the trio had written earlier in a failed cinematic translation of James Bond. Basically, Ian Fleming had always wanted James Bond to get to the screen, and so he had started a screenplay for Thunderball, bringing on Kevin McClory and Jack Whittingham. The screenplay didn't really get anywhere, but he did take some of the seeds of that idea into the Thunderball novel. The lawsuit would eventually be settled out of court, and McClory would retain certain screen rights to novels, story, plot, and characters. By then, of course, Bond was a box office success, and series producers Chubby Broccoli and Saltzman feared a rival McClory film beyond their control. They agreed to McClory's producer credit of a cinematic Thunderball with them as executive producers. And crucially, this cannot be stressed enough, they inserted a clause in this contract as well that he could not produce a rival Bond film of his own for 10 years, thinking within 10 years the Bond series would be dying down in popularity, wouldn't matter as much. That was a terrible bet. It was a terrible, terrible bet, and it would come back to haunt them in 20 years. But that all happened, and later in 1964, Ion producers Broccoli and Saltzman agreed with McClory to cinematically adapt the novel. It was promoted as Ian Fleming's Thunderball, yet along with the official credits to screenwriters Richard Maybaum and John Hopkins, the screenplay is also identified as based on an original screenplay by Jack Whittingham, and as based on the original story by Kevin McClory, Jack Whittingham, and Ian Fleming. And also, this is the only film in the entire Bond series where a Broccoli or Wilson is not listed as a produced by. Instead, it is listed as produced by Kevin McClory, with Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman taking on executive producer credits. There's a whole bunch more I didn't pull in. It is super messy and super petty. This 50-year-long feud. Again, to put this in context, this legal dispute went on until 2006. Ian Fleming died in 1964, but they just kept the stuff going after this. My personal favorite part of this is that Kevin McClory would eventually go to do Never Say Never Again in 1983, which is literally just Thunderball. But he only had the rights to Thunderball because he didn't write any other Bond novel, nor did he create the character, so he couldn't use the character in other things. He didn't have the license. He just had the license to Thunderball and the properties and those characters. So this whole 50-year running dispute is over one movie that he made. He got his, Thunderball knockoff made, and then continued to sue them over using the characters in this film, along, most crucially and most importantly, this is not in the trivia doc, but this is very, very, very important for what's going to happen with this storyline eventually. The big crux of the legal dispute is who owned the rights to Spectre. Who created Spectre has been a 50-plus year-long running battle. It's important because Spectre storyline is going to end in the Bond series and will not return for 40 years directly because of this. And it is going to be an abrupt ending. That is the spoiler alert future. It is going to be abrupt when Spectre leaves the series. It is not going to be a great ending for it. And it's because eventually they just got tired of fighting the legal battles with Kevin McClory. But that is for a future Bond movie. Thunderball, also following up on Goldfinger's Oscar-winning success, also won an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects. Indeed, the movie was groundbreaking in its usage of underwater filming techniques, something featured very prominently in the film. I pulled the stat for Trevor afterwards. A quarter of the movie is filmed underwater. They found this technology, they cracked it, they won an Oscar for it, and they went all in on underwater filming, baby.
Yeah, we talked about that last time. Of like,
it's crazy.
When you highlighted that, like, yeah, they've like created new technology that I was like, oh, that puts the entire movie into context for me that I did not have when I originally watched it, and just thought, wow, they're spending so much time underwater. This is not entertaining to me at all.
I think, the underwater sequences are so interesting, and it's strange. I think, and we'll get into this more obviously in a little bit, but the movie has this weird energy to it because of how heavily it is filmed underwater, right? A quarter of the movie is underwater, that it has weird issues with pacing because of that, especially the last act. And I'm in sort of a weird boat where I like the underwater film and stuff. I also recognize there are whole sequences that you were just underwater with no dialogue for like 10 minutes at a time, like 15 minutes at a time in like the last act. And it is a long period of time, right?
Yeah.
And it really does mess with the film's, I think, energy a little bit. It gets a little wonky, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, I mean, like, even the first real use of it being like the plane
sequence, right?
Sinking, and then like them covering it up and doing that whole thing. It's just like I remember thinking in that one, like, wow, this is going on like really long. And yeah, it's like, because it's just the action on screen. So there isn't dialogue. There's like there's very limited acting going on in that. It's mostly just like stunt people or whoever trying to like get into position to do whatever they need to do. And yeah, they use all that time to tell a story, but it's underwater. It is a very slow moving story that I feel like you could have cut like in half and still probably conveyed what you needed to convey in that sequence. And then just coming back to that kind of over and over throughout the course of the movie. It was like, oh, here we go again. Okay. Yeah. Like, I mean, I joked like, I made the note before knowing any of this. I was like, did Sean Connery just really want to go swimming a lot for this movie?
Right,
and I mean, I'm sure there's an element of that too, but it being this like, hey, we've poured a ton of money into this technology. We're going to use it for all we can, get our money's worth out of it. Like, I get it. I get that makes sense, especially at the time where like this would have been like never before seen kind of stuff. But here, just the novelty does not ring true anymore. So it instead just grinds the movie to a halt over and over and over again for me.
Yeah. But we'll get into that in a minute here. Because before we get that, we have more fun trivia facts, including more underwater stuff. Go figure. In the underwater scenes where Bond encounters sharks, Sean Connery was supposed to be protected by clear plastic panels shielding him from sharks in close-ups. However, the panels only extended about 3 feet in height, because why would you want more than that for a 6 foot tall Sean
They just
Connery?
used the same panels from the spider scene a few years
right?
ago.
Yeah. And sharks could swim over them. Go figure. As a result, in some scenes, notably during the pool fight at Largo's mansion, Connery got much closer to the real sharks than he wanted or expected. Director Terrence Young said in an interview in the making of documentary that I watched literally before we were doing this pod, so it's very fresh in my mind. They do a whole sequence on this. That the scenes used in this movie where Bond reacts in fright at the approach of the sharks were totally real. It was Connery reacting with genuine terror as the shark approached unobstructed by the plastic shielding. And then they cut to it in the movie, and it is very clearly he's genuinely like terrified. And more add on to that, that's when he like first opens the panel and goes right past him. On the other end of things, when he swims through the tunnel and then pops out and then swims out of the pool, there is a shark coming right at him from behind, if you watch that scene again. And it is very close to getting Sean Connery. And that one, I don't know if he noticed because he's swimming out of the pool immediately and not looking behind him, but it is right on his ass. And there's a whole sequence in the documentary about all of the shark shit, because it is truly wild what they got away with. One of the stuntmen who Largo like pushes into the pool, like one of his henchmen, and the stuntman had to jump on top of an actual shark in the movie to film that, and they show him directly jumping on the shark, and he was like, "This is nuts, I'm not gonna do this." And they were like, "Well, we want it for the scene." He said, "I'm not gonna do it," and said, "We'll give you $200 extra to do it." And he said, "I mean, all right, yeah." And so he did it for $200 extra and like jumped on top of the shark. There's another sequence where one of the sharks that was supposed to chase, like the main shark that was supposed to chase after Sean Connery, was dead. It was a dead shark. And the stuntman in question brought it into the pool and had like a chain attached to it to make it move because it's a dead shark. And he got in the pool, but with other sharks still in there as well. And Terrence Young, the director, said, "Oh, I need you to get further back to make it a better shot." And he said, "All right, yeah." And then he said, "Get further back, get further back, get further back." And eventually the stuntman realized he was suddenly in the middle of the pool with sharks all around him, and this dead shark that he was kind of steering, when all of a sudden he realized the dead shark was not dead at all. It was a totally alive shark that had just been I guess knocked out or sedated heavily, woke up, and immediately turned around and attacked another shark in the pool, leading to a feeding frenzy in the pool with the stuntman in the middle of the pool as he's just trying to quickly get out of the thing. Yeah, all of the shark shit is crazy. And then bringing it back to the final scene of the film where they're just having this NATO Spectre harpoon fight in the ocean with sharks floating around. Those are all real sharks too. And one of the stuntmen talked about how the tiger sharks actually super chill. They pretty much just swim on their own and don't really mess around with you. But the bull sharks, whenever you would have them and then let them go, they would basically just turn right back around at you and be immediately facing you. And he said, "We didn't use them very much after we realized that they were a bit more aggressive than the tiger sharks." 1965 for you in film.
I took a note in here at some point where they just straight up shoot a shark with a harpoon in one of the shots.
Straight up shoot
I was like, "Oh, PETA would not be happy with this movie at all."
There's no thing at the end of the film of no animals were harmed in the production. Animals definitely harmed it. We shot a shark, jumped on top of another one, and then another extra particularly gruesome fact I thought was that some of the sharks in the ocean fight, because it was just such a chaotic mess, had hooks in their fins so that they could be steered around where to go, so they wouldn't attack the cast and crew. It is a truly insane production involving the sharks and the people. Yes, this is the first Bond movie where Sean Connery actually appeared in the opening gun barrel sequence. The reason is pretty simple. Film technology had gotten better and better, and they made a switch in this movie to using increasingly good film techniques or film technology because they had a bigger budget. And the gun barrel sequence could no longer hide the fact that it wasn't Sean Connery. And so Bob Simmons no longer got to appear as James Bond in the opening gun barrel sequence, but fear not, Bob Simmons fans, because he got his great moment to shine. Bob Simmons, a longtime stunt coordinator for the Bond series, and the Bond who, like I mentioned, had appeared in the gun barrel sequence for the previous 3 Bond movies, gets an on-screen moment to shine in this movie, appearing as Colonel Bouvier, or Number 6, at the beginning of the film in one of my favorite sequences in the entire movie. I find it absolutely delicious. It's so great and so petty and ridiculous, and I remember just loving everything about it as a kid. It is a totally over-the-top sequence. It's great. And one of the only real fights in the movie. Pretty much that and the final fight on the yacht with Largo and his crew at the end are pretty much the only real fights in the movie. As the filming neared its conclusion, Connery had become increasingly agitated with press intrusion and was distracted with difficulties in his marriage. Connery refused to speak with journalists and photographers who followed him in Nassau, stating his frustration with the harassment that came with the role. Quote, I find that fame tends to turn one from an actor and a human being into a piece of merchandise, a public institution. Well, I don't intend to undergo that metamorphosis, end quote. In the end, he gave only a single interview to Playboy, which was incredibly... It's amazing, that interview, by the way, if you just look it up. As filming was wrapped up, and even turned down a substantial fee to appear in a promotional TV special made by Wolper Productions for NBC, The Incredible World of James Bond, where they show Bob Simmons catch on fire while filming the shot where the car gets blown up by the motorcycle. Literally caught on fire. Had to be put out. Yes, this is really where I just want to talk more broadly in trivia time of Sean Connery. Because like I have mentioned, I think starting last week with Goldfinger, these are where the cracks in the perfect harmony marriage of Sean Connery, Harry Saltzman, and Chubby Broccoli are all kind of beginning to fall apart. Sean Connery did not enjoy the fact that everyone was in his face all of the time. And I sort of alluded to this a little bit last week when I really tried to stress the fact that, like, Goldfinger was a massive success and spawned a whole thing, right? Like, James Bond sort of had its own Beatlemania moment, right? Sean Connery had his own Beatlesmania moment. And he began to tire of that very quickly. It should also be noted, like I said, all of these movies are being filmed essentially back to back to back. You film the movie, doing a press tour for it, film the next movie, doing a press tour for it, film the next movie, doing a press tour for it for 4 consecutive years. And so there's also a level of burnout on Sean Connery's part, right? As really the only cast member who has to do this, right? He's had, directors not come back. Guy Hamilton deliberately didn't come back for Thunderball because he was burnt out from doing Goldfinger. And Sean Connery wasn't afforded that opportunity, which is why there will be an entire year break before the next Bond movie. They don't film anything in 1966. You don't have another Bond movie until 1967 after this, to try to placate Sean Connery a little bit more. And this is also going to be where Sean Connery this and Goldfinger, where he begins his 50-year run of griping about the fact that he was never paid enough to be James Bond, and that the producers got all of the money, which is not an incredibly unfair position to make. But yes, it's all kind of beginning to happen here. Sean Connery is very burnt out by the end of Thunderball, and watching the making of a documentary, they only really briefly get into it, I think partially because the Broccoli and Wilsons own James Bond, so they can kind of edit these documentaries however they want, probably. But the bit they do of just kind of him just hanging on the island and, like, not fucking around with anyone, basically, other than, like, the main central cast, and that was it. Like, he didn't really leave the bubble, it just kind of stayed on his own thing. He was very, I think, tired by the fan and press intrusions into his life, as this kind of tribute fact also went into. His marriage is dissolving as well. That is all for trivia. Trevor, do you have anything you were looking up there?
Nope.
That's it for trivia then, which means it is 0070-second recap time. I clocked this one at about 80-ish seconds when I did it earlier today, so we'll see how I do now. But if I go a little bit over, you know what, sue me. I've gone a perfect 3-0 so far.
Well, we didn't do it the first time. So you're 2.
That's true. So a perfect 2, and I'll still take it. So yes, 007 recap. Here we go. Bond attends a funeral for fallen Spectre operative with a mysterious widow watching as well. Turns out the widow was Spectre baddie in question, and after a rockin' fight, Bond tosses flour on the body and jetpacks away. We love a good petty Bond. Now resting at the clinic, Bond seduces, very questionably, his nurse, gets into some hijinks with another patient, and sees a heavily bandaged man's face. After all this, he gets called back to London, where he and all the other 00s get the briefing on Operation Thunderball. Spectre number 2, Emilio Largo, has stolen 2 nuclear bombs and hidden them somewhere. It's up to the various 00s to find out where within 1 week. Bond sees the bandaged man's face in one of the pictures in his file and heads out to Nassau. There he sort of putzes around for a while, meets a lame-ass Felix Leiter, has a partner killed and sleep with, and then kills the movie's femme fatale. After that, he convinces Bandage Man's sister, Domino, to join up with him and stop Largo from launching the bombs. After an extended underwater sequence, they stop Largo's plan, and Bond hops on his yacht as it sails away before a final fistfight between the two ends with Domino harpooning Largo in the back. Afterwards, Bond and Domino hop ship and get snapped up by a plane. The doctor who rescued Domino, he can get fucked, I guess.
It was 84 seconds.
I'm pretty happy with that.
Yeah.
The big thing for me before we get to kind of the recap and everything from here, because it's not really a good time to ever mention it again other than right now. I had never noticed, Trevor, until this viewing, they just completely fuck the doctor. The doctor rescues Domino, helps him out, and then I was like, great, yeah, they all hop out, and then very noticeably not in that raft when they get rescued.
Yeah.
Just on the ocean, apparently.
Yeah, I noted that, and the fact that there's no chance in hell Domino is hanging on for however long they're flying through the air on that. She's definitely falling to her death at some point, too.
I'm glad you brought this up. More than that, watching it now, because I obviously knew how this ended, but like watching it more close this time, that plane did not slow down a beat. That plane is going full speed, grabs that thing. Again, it should be made very clear. James latches on at his neck, and then the plane yanks him up. So forget Domino. James Bond has a broken neck probably, right? If Spider-Man's catching Gwen Stacy by the ankle and snapping her neck, this is literally grabbing him by the neck and yanking him at hundreds of miles an hour. Yeah, it is a very weird plot device. Like, I don't know, but I had to give the doctor his shout out because he literally saves the day after doing nothing the entire movie. And then they just kind of let him go away.
Yeah.
Trevor, that leads me to your hosting segment here. How many people were killed?
So yeah, we got I'm looking specifically, I have like one, henchman death in here, but I won't count that. So how many people does Bond kill? How many like named characters does Bond kill throughout this film?
Yes, that's an excellent question. Bond kills Colonel Bouvier, obviously. And then this is a tricky one. Bond kills Colonel Bouvier. You could argue he kills one of the Spectre henchmen at the clinic when he knocks him out and wraps the phone around his head.
Mm-hmm.
It's made unclear if that henchman is dead or just knocked out.
Yeah.
But we'll say he just is knocked out.
Yeah. And that would be an unnamed henchman, so I'm not counting those anyway.
So then after Colonel Bouvier, he doesn't kill anyone at the clinic because the Spectre baddie gets killed by Volpe. So then we go to the Caribbean, and there, wow, it really might be, again, Volpe's death is kind of ambiguous. So, you could argue Bond, assisted in her death by, moving her, obviously, to take the bullet, but he didn't fire the gun.
Yeah.
That one, I think, is a little, questionable. I would say he didn't kill her.
Yeah, no, not counting that one. The description, used as a human shield by Bond, but she is killed and she is shot by her own men.
So then really I would say it would be Vargas, Colonel Bouvier, and then that's when it becomes wonky, right? Where they're a couple, I think he kills one or two henchmen when he breaks into Largo's lair. Neither one of them are named, obviously. And then there's a shit ton of unnamed people he probably kills in the underwater fight, right? That's super ambiguous. That's so hard to tell who is Bond and who isn't.
yeah. No idea who their Bond is killing at all.
But really, because he didn't kill Largo, so Bond might only kill two named characters in the movie. I'm going to go with two people that are named in the movie.
So the count we have is 3, because Yanni is knocked out by Bond and then blown up with the boat. So Bond is basically directly responsible for that guy's death in the crash.
I don't even know who
it's Janni. I believe it's I believe it was the other main henchman alongside Vargas.
That it had a name apparently.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Fair enough.
Then the only other one that I pulled in here as an unnamed henchman would have been the henchman that is drowned by Bond and then eaten by sharks, as like Bond is fighting in the when they like bring the pool lid over.
Totally fair. Bond killed that guy.
But yeah, that's
a legitimate one.
That's unnamed henchman. So yeah, this count I would say is 3.
That is, and they're running for being one of the lowest of any things. Again, if named people, Bond kills a shit ton of people in the underwater fight.
That's again that one of the biggest criticisms I have of the underwater especially like the end underwater fight is like Bond and all of the Coast Guard people are in orange, so you know who the good guys are, and then all of the the Spectre bad people are in black, obviously, so you know who the bad guys are. But you have no idea who is doing what in that whole sequence. It's just like a flurry of a very slow flurry of harpoons being shot at one another, people like stabbing each other with knives underwater. Then people that you think were dead or something coming back and then shooting another harpoon or something. So yeah, yes. And
it is
the Thunderball deaths.
I mean, we can hop into it right now in terms of the recap. I mean, we'll start more broadly, Trevor. What were your thoughts on Thunderball?
I mean, yeah, like my broad thoughts are, I think this, because the underwater stuff does not have the novelty that it had 60 years ago, 50 years ago, like just really, really like drags this movie down a lot for me. I think there are a lot of like cool and interesting ideas within this movie. I think the plot of, like using a doppelganger to hijack this plane and steal a couple of nukes is like a good modern day, even like terrorist kind of plot. And I mentioned when we were talking a little bit yesterday, like I like that this kind of like introduces that idea that, like is much more of a common kind of trope now, but the guy who is the doppelganger basically saying like, the price for my services has now gone up, like, and kind of like holding the bad guys ransom, which like obviously anybody who has ever seen any of these kinds of movies before knows that's not going to work out well for him. But at the time, that was, I'm sure, a very clever idea and a subversion of like, oh yeah, if like they did need me, I would ask for more money in that kind of situation or something like that. So like I appreciated that element of it. And I appreciated, like I mentioned also, like Volpe basically being like a Spectre version of Q in that opening sequence, of like giving him like here's what you're gonna need to here's your gadgets that you're gonna need to get by this. I thought was a cool, interesting twist, and I appreciated her in general as a villain. I think kind of throughout the film. Even if I thought like it was weird that like Bond, knowing she's a bad guy, knowing that she's pretty much like directly responsible for
Paula's death,
for Paula's death and his partner's death, still just being like, all right, yeah, I'm gonna bang this out, and we'll deal with like the criminal dealings with it later or whatever. It's like, that's really shady shit there.
I did like their whole exchange afterwards, right? Where like, again, petty Bond like being like, you didn't think I enjoyed that. That was for Queen and Country, right? And then her completely calling him on his shit, right? And like essentially directly referencing what just happened in Goldfinger, right? Where it's like, I'm sorry you didn't turn me, like all of your other women, but I'm still a bad guy here, right? Like, you're not that good in the sack to just suddenly give me like a change of conscience here, and like giving him the shit right back after he like insults her. I thought she was great.
Yeah. I am still, I think, even a little bit now confused almost on like I guess the relationship between Largo #2 and the girl, is it Domino, right? Like she's basically like his concubine, his kept woman kind of thing, right? Because there's a line in there at some point that like uh I think like she said something to the effect of like he works for my guardian, and I was like, wait, is she like underage in it? I was very uncomfortable by just the domino aspect of the film in general.
Sure.
Of like she feels like she is being portrayed as like underage to obviously Largo's not a young guy, so there's like the whole like age kind of difference there. Then also Bond obviously not being a young guy anymore either. It was just like that was a whole other layer of like I'm uncomfortable with like this character being portrayed in this light this much. And just like the casual nature with which like Largo kind of like both Largo and Bond are just kind of like they just treat her like a thing rather than like a person. Especially that I especially made a note of Bond being just a straight up sociopath after he has learned that her brother has died, sleeps with her underwater, I guess, and then like comes up to tell her like, hey, I have bad news about your brother. It's like, no, you are just a horrible person. So yeah, I like there were those elements I was just like, oh, I don't like a lot of this. As for the elements that you really seem to latch onto of like the Spectre structure that you get kind of like in the opening, I was like, I guess a little bit in that like, okay, they're out there running other missions around the world or whatever, and kind of like coming back and reporting to one another. And clearly like Blofeld, knows more than he lets his agents on, and they do the whole like Agent 9 and 11 have like run the numbers and one of them's embezzling, and it's like I don't know if it's just I've seen that same beat played out so many other times since that it loses the extra impact that it might have had here. But it very much just kind of seems like, well, they're all bad guys, and the guy knew he wasn't the embezzling one. So like as soon as it gets introduced that somebody else is embezzling, like he kind of like the acting wasn't great here, because I was like, I don't know if he's supposed to be acting like he's safe or he's acting like he's still nervous or whatever. And then they just cut to the other guy getting electrocuted, and then like his chair going down and then coming back up like super fried. And it's like it didn't work for me in the way that it sounds like it works for you. And there's also an element, of course, of like I wonder how much of that is colored by Austin Powers straight up making fun of that kind of stuff with Mustafa in particular, the Will Ferrell character. I'm still alive, but I'm just very badly burnt. Like I almost expected this guy to be saying that from downstairs.
I think there's a lot to unpack and all that. That you gave me a lot to work with there. I think Domino, right? So I always take Largo as her guardian, less in terms of like a adult overseeing like a minor, and more of a guardian in terms of, there is this sort of like, I think she says at one point like, I'm his mistress basically, right?
Yeah.
Like, and more like guardian in like that sense, right? Like I'm the mistress to this man. He gives me all this stuff, right? I do totally think it is valid to certainly critique Largo, because he is just like a psychopath, for his treatment of Domino. But yeah, I mean, like, I think I've said it before on this podcast where Sean Connery's Bond, I really love, right? He's obviously my favorite Bond, but it's sort of interesting watching all of his movies because he's sort of always tinkering with it, right? Like, he gets a really good version of it in like From Russia with Love or Goldfinger, but then like tinkers with it more here in Thunderball, and I like this version a little bit less actually. I think it runs a bit more towards like a Callanus version, right, and a bit more kind of like brutish and kind of arrogant almost version of Bond that I find a little bit less appealing. And I think that comes across in his dynamic, not just with Domino, but in most of the other characters, which is sort of why I like the fact that he kind of gets humbled a little bit, right, by like Volpe, or even gets humbled a little bit in his interactions with Domino, right, where like she'll call him out for stuff. The only real saving grace I can say for Bond in terms of like him being sort of abrupt in his dealings with Domino is he's got a week to save the world, right? So he's got to kind of move quick when he gets information. But yeah, the underwater sex scene is, I mean, if that's what happens, question mark, it has like always been weird, just like both logistically and also like that was a weird thing.
I mean, I feel like because I made the note, and then like she says something that basically confirms it when they're up on the beach there before like Vargas interrupts or whatever. That like, oh, is this why you made love to me, just to like use me or something like that? Also, I just want to also highlight, and this again is jumping to my other section or whatever, but like the whole interaction with the masseuse, I was like, oh, like nope, nope, that's a whole like bullshit quid pro quo for sex kind of thing. I was like, oh, that's gross.
So a lot of people talk about the worst Bond seduction scenes, I think. And a lot of them come back to like the 60s or 70s because it was just a very different era. And people reference a lot. I personally, even as a kid, I was like, I don't know about that one. I've long thought this is maybe the worst in the entire series because it is just straight up like, again, like this Bond just is sort of just like not right for me and a lot of his interactions with characters. And that's a great example where like there's no sort of like witty like one-liner like wink kind of nudge thing. It's just straight up like have sex with me. It's like super direct.
Yeah.
It is like
it is like have sex with me or it's your job. Like
yeah,
or I will tell your boss.
Yeah. It is very much not any sort of like wink wink kind of sly thing like they've been before in other Bond movies or a little bit afterwards. It is like way more direct. And they kind of, I think in their minds they get away with it because she then like really falls for him and like they're like hanging out afterwards and like keep meeting each other multiple times after like the incident. But it is very much like all I've seen of their interaction before this moment has been pretty confrontational, I would say. Mm-hmm. He seems like he's like a super annoying patient to work with, which I would get.
Yeah. That was before that he got handsy kiss with her too, and it's like, yep, nope, that's yeah.
Yep. So in a lot of ways, I typically point to this as like the worst Bond seduction in the series. Like it is certainly one of the more aggressive, just repeated things, and then the quid pro quo kind of thing. It's not great, right? Like Bond's relations with like all of the women in this film are, I think, questionable is putting it pretty nicely. Like Domino maybe gets the best end of it just because she either isn't dead or didn't sleep with him to keep her job, right? She's got that going for her, I guess.
But again, it's not. She's definitely not surviving that plane ride at the end of the movie.
Fair enough, right? It's not great for sure. I will say, I don't know. I mean, I think I like Thunderball. And it's strange because like there aren't even that many scenes that like we can talk about where I'm like, I really like that scene. It's just sort of like the feeling of the movie, right? Like it is this weird simultaneous thing of like me being like, this movie's really long, right? It's the longest Bond movie we've had so far at 2 hours and 10 minutes. The first 2 hour Bond movie. And it feels it, right? It is long, it is slow, it is plotting. I would argue every single act of the movie has pacing issues. The first and last act in particular are just real slow. The first act, there is a lot of not anything happening. They're at that clinic for a long time, it feels like. But I sort of dig it, right? Like I think I just sort of have always liked the fact that Thunderball is such a weird Bond movie, right? Like there's no other Bond movie like Thunderball, right? Like there are Goldfinger clones, and there are movies that try to kind of do what From Russia with Love did, And there's even now like movies that have tried to kind of mimic something like On Her Majesty's Secret Service, but there aren't a lot of movies in the series, really any, that match what Thunderball kind of did, and that's for both good and bad reasons, right? Like, it is a super over the top, like giant production and larger than life thing, and it is slow and there's not a lot of action and it's a quarter of it's underwater, right? All these things, but I still just like it. Right, and we'll get to our rankings later on, right? And it's certainly not as good as Goldfinger, right? Like, it is such a stark departure from that movie, right, which we just praised last week, or peek behind the curtain yesterday when we did that podcast. We're like, Goldfinger is great, right? Like, Goldfinger is pretty simple. Goldfinger just like, that's a great movie on like almost every level. It like does what it wanted to do in terms of gadgets and characters and villain and henchman. And Posty Galore is great, and it's a great Sean Connery performance. The location, like almost every level of Goldfinger is really, really good, really great even. Thunderball is way more messy than that, and I think I sort of appreciate it for being this like really ambitious, like giant production that fails at a lot of things and doesn't do a lot of things right, but also kind of succeeds in spite of that. Right? Like, I like Largo as a villain a lot. I think he's a great Bond villain. Right? And like, if we're doing like villains corner stuff right now, right? Like, you know, I look at the rank and of how we have this stuff of, you know, Goldfinger, Red Grant, Oddjob, Rosa Klebb, Dr. No. I think Largo is certainly better than Dr. No and Rosa Klebb. And then it's a matter of like where he falls in that like Goldfinger, Red Grant, Oddjob thing, right? And I'd probably have him above Oddjob just because he gets to have dialogue and kind of a back and forth in this whole exchange. I love the fact that this is sort of an interesting Bond movie where pretty much from the opening seconds, the bad guy knows that James Bond is James Bond, and James Bond knows the bad guy is the bad guy, and there's like no sort of hiding the fact. They're very much just like openly saying, yeah, we're each trying to like stop each other. Let's just like have lunch together and shoot, you know, and do all sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's the whole sequence, and we can dive more into the Felix Leiter of this episode
absolutely right now
if you want,
yeah.
But like, he's just terrible in this movie. Like,
It's
he was bad in the last one, but like, he is just phenomenally a worse spy in this one. To the fact that like they're doing like espionage by just like flying a helicopter over the guy's compound in like plain view. Like, I was like, they're just daylight. Not even trying to be like spies in this, and like I didn't even realize it was Felix until because they've switched up the actor every time, so I just didn't know. Like, I saw this guy like in the background, a lot of shots and stuff. I was like, this guy, like, I thought he was one of like the bad guy's henchmen or something like that.
Sure.
Because he was just like very like stealing focus in scenes and stuff. And it wasn't until he kind of like comes in, Bond like answers the door and like socks him in the stomach when he's about to like introduce, or when he's about to say like 007 or whatever. And like, so that's when they confirmed that this is Felix. I was like, oh God, he's just terrible. he's completely like ready to blow cover. But again, admittedly, Bond's also going around introducing himself to everybody he ever meets. So he's not he's not even really hiding himself or who he is or anything like that. But yeah, like, just the Felixness of this one, I was just like, you are just like cartoonishly a bad like like spy in this one that I can't take you seriously.
Rick Van Nutter's performance as Felix Leiter, I think, is one of the worst in the entire series on like a whole bunch of levels. He's always one of my least favorite. Right, like Sick Linder in Goldfinger is like sort of a goofy one, and he's not good at his job, but like he has, I think, a lot of like fun with Bond, right? Like their chemistry I like a lot in Goldfinger, right? And their back and forth and their sense of humor really works for me. And so even though he's kind of not great, it works in the context of that movie. Here he's utterly incompetent, like you said, which isn't necessarily, you know, a terrible flaw to have in a movie if he's like funny or if they have a good chemistry or back and forth or anything. But no, like Rick Van Nutter is so bland as Felix Leiter, right? Like one of my favorite shots is before he gets introduced as Felix Leiter. Like you said, he just kind of like puts in the background. And then in the shot where Domino is dancing with James Bond and then Emilio Argo comes up and like takes her and they walk away, he is just straight up behind James Bond. Like not even like hiding him. He's just like right behind him. And why he wouldn't say, hey, James, at that moment, I have no idea. But he's like directly behind him, just like watching. And it's like, you're just bad at hiding if you're trying to hide yourself here, right? And then you get to, flying the plane in broad daylight. The part I like is essentially the second part of that, where later on in the movie, they're flying around looking for the bomb still. Mm-hmm. And they're in like the Golden Grotto or whatever they call it. Like Dum-Dum they give it.
Yep.
And Bond is like, what is this? And Felix kind of gives the explanation. And then Bond's like, oh, like we should get close. And Felix goes, there's no way it could be down there. Sharks. And Bond's like, well, I don't know. Let's look. And they just like get lower and Bond's immediately like, I see it.
Yeah.
Like I can see it, Felix. And he's like, I don't know, man. And then Bond like takes out this like weird like bucket telescope.
Yeah.
And like looks to it and goes like, I am looking at it right now. So like also shout out to Felix being a terrible spy for like not saying, hey, what if we get lower to actually see a boat in the ocean? Or see a plane in the ocean, right? Like he is just so incompetent and so whatever. So much that like he's not in the climax at all. Like he's not in the underwater sequence. He's not like they just like push him aside.
Yeah.
Because he's just an incompetent Felix Leiter. It's great. I love how terrible this Felix Leiter is.
I don't remember what it was in reference to, but here in my notes, in between Volpe gets the drop on Paula and Bond bangs Volpe, I just have the note, Felix is just the absolute worst spy? ?
Yeah.
No idea.
He's
No recollection on what in specific that was like tying to, but
everything with him and like when they're at like where I guess like the like de facto Q lab that Q sets up, right? When they're there and like Felix Leiter's there too, and it's just like, well, that's impossible kind of thing, right? He has like one of those lines, and Bond's like, well, no, like it's not. Like he just like can't seem to understand how to do his job, and it's just like, I don't know, man. Like he's a real bad Felix Leiter. He might not be the worst, but he is a strong contender. His only saving grace is that like he's not like a bad actor. He's very bland. But we will have a bad actor waiting for us still. But yeah, he's not great.
I will say shout out to Q's Hawaiian garb or his like tropical garb.
So good.
So good. It was fun seeing like because we got to Nassau and I was like, oh, we didn't do the typical like Q scene back in England. And so when he like just walks through the door and like his blue floral number or whatever, I was like, all right, I'm okay with this.
The first time in the series that we'll have Q come out and visit in the field, it will not be the last time, and they're always great because Q gets just to wear like regular person clothes, and it's always hilarious to see Desmond Llewellyn dress up like that. One thing I want to talk about that I think is really cool is the entire conference room sequence with like all the double O's present, like both because it is such a like perfect encapsulation of like what a Ken Adams set would look like. Just this giant, huge room with like fucking panel walls and like it's like, it is, it's perfect Ken Adams. And also because it's so cool to see like all of these other 00 agents, or you only see one, but like who are these guys? Like, what are they doing? Like, what's their story? I always loved that.
I didn't think that at all. I thought, okay, there's other agents in this room. My note on that scene was, guy really lifted that entire comically large portrait just to say, we haven't been able to find the plane.
My favorite thing,
and that was it. It was just like when like they walk in, I'm just like, why is this room so tall? What is the point of this? Like, what is about to go on here? And then like that just kind of like slowly lifts up, and we see like the, you know, the map, kind of the electronic map behind it or whatever, and they're just like, so we've done this whole radius here and we just haven't been able to find anything. I'm like, cool. Did not need that reveal.
My favorite thing about that is, yeah, they just have a giant circle, and it's like, it could be anywhere within a 500-mile radius of like this area that includes Africa, Europe, South America, North America, and the Caribbean. Anywhere in these 4 continents. And while it is nice to see a visual representation of like where it could be at, it's not in Asia. We know that. That's great. It's not in Australia. That's good to know. It is quite the range. I also love the idea of being like, well, how hard are you looking in certain areas, right? Like, I guess it should be easier to find than you guys are making it be, right? Like, if it was going down at a certain point in that area, I would check there first. I would expend most of my resources wherever it was fallen. I would go there and probably spend less time in like Africa or South America. Those seem less likely options because someone might see a nuclear jet landing somewhere. But yeah, I just the whole scene is great. I loved it. It is so over the top. It is great. Like, I think part of what I like about Thunderball is it is maybe the first Bond movie that gets right up to the line of jumping the shark, and sort of dances over it a lot. And
I mean, cute verbiage. I think it absolutely jumps the shark, and it does it multiple times in the movie in a very
right?
real sense. I did not think so,
like,
but you clearly did.
Because like out of the first like 6 Bond movies, like I guess all 6 of the ones in the 60s, this is really the only one that like I think truly commits to like, we're just gonna go be ridiculous completely. Right, like the 2 that followed this, the last in the 60s, are much more serious. And this one wasn't, right? I think it's interesting because I think in trying to follow up Goldfinger, they drew a lot of like the weirdest lessons from that movie, and like ignored a lot of what made that movie special. And that's sort of interesting to watch, which I think is part of why I like enjoy parts of it. Like, this movie's not great at all. I want to be very clear about that. Like, I'm talking about it much more positively than Trevor. This movie's, it dances around the line of being good, even, right? Like, it is a messy movie. It is very messy, very not great at times. It is, you know, long plot and all this kind of stuff, but it's ridiculous. And I think, you know, there's elements of kind of like absurdity and comedy in Goldfinger, but like the comedy isn't really here in Thunderball. It's like more kind of like hard-edged and mean-spirited, and it's sort of weird. They like take the parts of Bond that were kind of like petty and amplify them in Thunderball, but ignore all of his like charm. Like, he's not really that charming in this movie. They ignore his kind of like suaveness and focus more on like the rough parts of Bond, and like, you know, him willing to like sacrifice people if they need to. Like, the villains are great and like kind of crazy, but like they really lean into like them being like psychotic. Like, they just take a lot of like the lessons from Goldfinger, but not the ones that I would have taken. And it's just such an interesting direction. Yeah, I don't know. That's what I would say about Thunderball. The underwater fight sequence, I feel like we have to, you know, go into, obviously. What a weird decision, right? Like, for the second, you know, that maybe that'll be my recurring new segment I'll do, is just like the fly on the wall moment. And like, I'd have loved to have been a fly on the wall when they discussed how long they were going to make that sequence, and been like, do we really want to commit to like a 15 to 20 minute long dialogue free underwater fight sequence where it's hard to tell what is happening? Like, do we want to do that? And if we do, should we? Right? Like, you gave the line a couple times that I really like, of like, Thunderball had the Jurassic Park moment of like, you know, we didn't stop to think if we should do something just because we could. And yeah, I mean, they just did it. They had this new technology. They were going to run wild with it, and they did. And it is just what happens. I can't. It is just the movie. Yeah, I mean, that to me is Thunderball in a nutshell. Basically, like they didn't stop to ask if they should do this.
Yeah, it's because I mean, like we had the obviously the underwater sequence with the plane. We had the underwater sequence where Bond fights like the one guy when he's trying to do like the espionage, the reconnaissance kind of thing.
The sharks.
We have multiple like Bond underwater with Domino, both in like her introduction scene as well as like when when he finds her later on to
Bond going
like or yeah, I mean there's underwater of Bond finding the plane.
That's what I was gonna say. Bond going to Largo's boat, and taking the pictures there.
Yep. And then like he kind of like infiltrates with Largo's crew for a little bit. They go and find like the nuke, and then they find out that Bond's among them or whatever. And
Largo just like looks up something. He's like, "Oh, hey, that guy's Bond."
Yeah. And so Bond gets like stranded there for a little bit while they like continue to get away, and then we get like another just kind of weird long, not wordless because this is where Felix like shows up to like get Bond with the helicopter or whatever from the tracker, but it's still like a long sequence with like very little happening of Bond just kind of sitting there like looking up from a crevice. And then we get just an epically long underwater fight sequence when like everybody else gets thrown into the mix. Like I took the note at some point like this is absurdly too much underwater scuba combat. And then I think the movie went on for another 10 minutes still.
It is, what I will say to the underwater fight sequences credit is John Barry is doing his damnedest to make it work. Like the music in that sequence is great. Like he's doing everything he can to make it entertaining and engaging, right? Like the music in this movie, really, I would say the whole way through is great. Like John Barry's score is, I think, really, really good in Thunderball. Like he tries to make all of the underwater sequences have some sort of life or pop to them. It is just a lot, right? And like Tom Jones gives a iconic turn voice in the Thunderball theme. It is just a lot of underwater scenes, and that says nothing. Like going back to one of them, because it reminded me the scene where Bond goes to Largo's boat and like takes the pictures and somehow like trips an underwater alarm in 1965 that they had.
It wasn't even that, like there was just like another guy down there patrolling the boat or whatever. And
they just like knew.
Yeah.
My favorite part of that is like Bond like swimming away and then like the guys like chucking grenades at him, and then like some of the guys get in a boat and like throw grenades and like run over like the pack he had taken off, pick it up, look at that, and like the goggles that came up, I'm like, must be dead.
Yep.
Because I know when I run over someone in a boat, their backpack completely gets unbuckled from them and their goggles get removed from their head.
I will say like in defense of that, they don't know he has that like rebreather thing that Q gave him that like keeps him alive because like even if they didn't think they ran over him in that moment or whatever, like they clearly can't see him. He's like he can't survive without this. So yeah, we're probably in the clear, but he's got the rebreather.
My favorite thing about Thunderball that's like a random thing, just might be the fact that it is maybe the prime example of like checking to make sure the person's actually dead. Because I feel like there are like 4 or 5 times, like it's happens repeatedly where someone's like tells Largo Bond is dead and he is not dead. And like at a certain point in time, Largo's gonna be like, look, just like actually kill this man before you tell me that he's dead. Because like he gets told a lot, like, oh, we should go back and tell Largo we got him. And then it's like, no, he's not. You didn't get him at all.
Yeah. I mean, like I like we joked about it. Like they just cover up the pool while like Bond is in there with another guy, and they're like, let the sharks in. We won't like confirm that any of this. Like you could have also let the sharks in while Bond was like fighting in your view.
Thing, and if he tries to climb up, push him in or shoot him.
Or yeah, exactly. Like, that's a pretty like there's like 4 of you around the pool with guns. Just shoot him.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was another moment in there that I wanted to highlight of like when Bond is like trying to be sneaky there, like, and he climbs on the roof and like slips and drops the gun and that goes off. I'm like, oh, Bond Bond isn't a great, like, that was that ties into what I talked about last week for Goldfinger, of like, Bond isn't always a great spy. Like, he
Yeah,
makes a lot of mistakes
it's kind of
and
cool.
just kind of lucks out sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, last little thing I want to touch on, after the underwater combat finally finishes and we get back up on the boat, and like the boat just becomes like a runaway bit, like a runaway train effectively, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
I hated entirely how that final sequence was shot, with just like everything happening at like 3 times speed. Like, anytime you cut to like the boat, racing around the reef or whatever, and you're seeing the action outside, it's like, it was just way too fast. And there were a couple moments in this movie earlier on that had that same kind of like frenetic energy to them, and it feels like it was almost like overcompensating for the lethargic drolls of the underwater stuff. But like, the way those elements were shot, just cinematography wise, yeah, cinematographically, whatever, like, they were not good. And really, like, I mean, they were a choice that I did not vibe with at all. And so, yeah, like, the whole third act of this movie just does not work at all for me in any real regard. And so,
which is totally fair.
It ends up leaving, the last 40 minutes of this the movie as just kind of like a big, like, oh, they could have gone a lot of different places with this, and I do not vibe with the way they went with it.
Yep. I think that's all totally fair. I think that's all totally fair. And I think, Thunderball is a movie that I think suffers from having too many cooks in the kitchen, right? Because it is a film that was originally a screenplay written by Ian Fleming, Kevin McClory, and Jack Whittingham. And then they got, they did that in like 1959 when they wrote that original screenplay. Then Ian Fleming wrote a book that changed stuff. So there's like a fourth kind of thing down here, like a fourth hand in Ian Fleming twice. And then this screenplay was written by Richard Maybaum and another screenwriter, with the producers also changing stuff, with Kevin McClory again to make it more to his liking. And then Sean Connery also changed stuff. So there are like 8 different, and then also the director coming in. So there's like 9 different people all having an influence on this film. And I think that is sort of why this film was very muddled to me, right? Like, I think Thunderball never builds up any sustained momentum, right? Like, it'll have like a scene or two where it's like, that was really cool. And then it'll just kind of like immediately lose that speed and momentum. It is never really able to get out of the starting blocks effectively, with maybe again, that's why I said at the beginning, like, maybe my favorite scene in the entire movie is the opening pre-title credit sequence at the funeral. Because I think that one has like, it's got a good action scene, right? It's got like the cool like jetpack scene. So if you're 1965, that's crazy. You get the Aston Martin again. You have like kind of the one-liners, like Bond works a bit more there. Like, I think it is like the best part of the movie.
Yeah.
And the problem is it's a 2 hour and 10 minute movie, and you got the best part of the movie and it's 4 minutes, the movie's done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That was the other thing that we touched on last week, of like this petty Bond, like the decision to go back and throw the flowers on the corpse, Trevor. Was just like, what is this Bond? I
loved it. It's so good. Yeah, like, it's sort of interesting because, like, watching all of them now, seeing it a bit more, that like Connery really was always tinkering with his Bond, right? And he really maybe only had 2 Bond performances that are like, that was a great, like, that was like he admitted he was trying to do, and it's Goldfinger and You Only Live Twice, I think. And the other 3 are him in various stages of like either working on it because it's his first one, tinkering with it a bit more in For Much Love, and then like tinkering with it again in Thunderball for whatever reason, even though he had kind of nailed it in Goldfinger. Yeah, it's very, very interesting. And I do think, we don't rank them, but like, I do think this is, a great pre-credits sequence. I really enjoy it. And I think, we'll kind of hop around the order of like the pods and a pod, but like, in terms of like those music moments, Thunderball is a great song. And I think Tom Jones is great with it. And, I really like it. It doesn't really, unfortunately, I don't know if I like it as much as Goldfinger, And we only really have like 2 real themes that we've ranked so far with Goldfinger and Thunderball, because From Russia with Love is sort of like a weird asterisk one. But Thunderball is great, and the music in this movie I really do think is great across the board, and is one of the few like highlights throughout the entire thing.
I mean, for me, the Thunderball theme kicked in, and I was like immediately, oh, Tom Jones. And then like in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, that's right. Like I know some trivia about Tom Jones, like passing out while he's singing like the last note of the number or whatever. And so like that kicks in, and then I'm listening to the music. I'm just like, it's a fine song. But like it did not, like, I think it is very telling that this song was not anything that that has like breached through and lasted the test of time to be in public consciousness for me. So like, and already I've pretty much forgotten like what if I hear it again, I'll hear the Tom Jones be like, oh yeah, there's Tom Jones singing his song, but like it did not leave any kind of like distinct impression on me. So it easily falls below the Goldfinger ranking for me.
Trevor, what is the earmuffs moment that has or hasn't aged well in Thunderball?
Yeah, I mean, like we already talked about a lot of them, but like the most notably, I would say the like repeated cases of assault that Bond has on the women throughout this film, notably the masseuse in the beginning there, the trauma inflicted upon Domino, or the exploitation of Domino before he inflicts, mental trauma of letting her know that her brother's passed.
Your brother's dead.
And then just the surrealist nature of his relationship with Volpe. All like just 3 strikes across the board there. And then also from the other one we touched on really is like just the animal handling of this film, not at all holding up
not great.
Effectively.
Not great.
And then it is from I think just from a film going perspective, I don't think all of the underwater stuff holds up well. I think it holds up fine in the, I mean, no, like it drags the movie down a lot for me. And I think it's just, they spend way too much time on those sequences. As you like did, or whoever else ran the numbers, in like a 2-hour and 10-minute movie, where a full quarter of that, so 30 minutes of this movie at least, are filmed underwater, is way too much of this movie to have been filmed underwater.
And it's not even like an evenly distributed 30 minutes. It is like legitimately like 15-minute chunk of that is just in one unbroken section at the end.
Yeah.
It is just one long take at the end. Yeah.
So I think all of those things have not aged well. I will say, like, when the rebreather gets introduced, I was like, oh, it's like Qui-Gon uses in The Phantom Menace. So
it's rad as shit.
That held up fine.
I didn't include it in the movie, but my it is a great little bit of trivia. Is someone had been working on a rebreather in like real life for years, and when they saw this movie, they went to ask the producers and like stunt crew like how they made one, like how did it work, and they had to break it to them that like it wasn't real. The actors were just holding their breath, or just Sean Connery was holding his breath anytime he actually used it. But I love that bit that someone was so convinced it was real, because it looks very convincing. That it actually tricked someone who'd been spending a few years of his life working on one. Yeah, I agree. Those are all the things that haven't aged well. It's pretty disappointing. Trevor, where do we rank Emilio Largo in our Villains Corner section?
I mean, you were saying you put him above Oddjob.
I think it's tough for me. He's certainly right around that thing.
Like, he definitely has like more expositionally to do than Oddjob, I guess. But like, he's also like there's an element of this that when he suits up and gets in the scuba gear, I'm just like, oh, there's a weird, like, almost unintentionally funny by this somewhat portly old guy with an eye patch getting into the scuba gear with
Wearing
the rest of his
goggles,
henchmen as opposed to like directing his forces to get like the fact that he's getting in the water with everybody else is just like, okay, I don't think he needs to do that.
The number 2 ranking or member inspector.
Yeah,
in the
like
pool with everyone
he's
else.
he's getting his hands dirty with everybody else. Like he like I feel like you may have built him up a little too much for me because I feel like he's going to be largely forgettable in the grand scheme of 50 years of Bond. Apart from the fact that, like, yes, very clearly the Robert Wagner / Rob Lowe number 2 of Austin Powers is very clearly clear. Just absolutely ripping on this guy. Yes. So like, yeah, he didn't do anything memorable. Like he didn't have any great, lines like, no, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. Like he is just going to go down as like, oh, the guy who had sharks, which is
and an eye patch.
Sharks and an eye patch, which admittedly he may have been the first to do that, but like it has become such a staple of this that like
it'll be a staple of the series. Don't worry, it's coming back.
He does not feel original seeing that in 2021. So like I would probably put him below Oddjob just because I think Oddjob was at least like formidable in his fighting and stuff. Whereas this guy, I mean, honestly the most like violent we see him get is with Domino at the end. And even that, like, we don't see so much as like, oh, he rips her dress and he like holds ice cubes and a cigar. I think
it's a very
to
weird
like imply that he's going to be torturing her, but we don't see any kind of like effects of that. Like, so yeah, just it didn't work for me.
I don't want to dismiss the like, he's torturing Domino or getting ready to. I understand that. It's not great. Want to stress that. But I've always found it hilarious. He's like, I'm going to burn you with a cigar, which is like, okay, that I can see how that would hurt, and put cold ice on you. And it's like, one of these seems like a worse punishment than the other. And like, I understand like ice in like the right places and enough time like is not good, but like, even as a kid, I was always like, that's a ridiculous fucking threat. Mm-hmm. That is and like, I always just found it hilarious, right? Like he is a cartoon villain in some ways, but like not necessarily the right ways. I'm fine having him below Oddjob. I've already updated the doc to have him below Oddjob.
Yeah. If anything, I would consider making the case for Volpe as like more interesting than he was. I mean, still, I don't know if I'd even put her above Oddjob.
Oh, definitely not. No, yeah. In terms of like henchmen.
But yeah, because there's also the entire sequence that we didn't really talk about at all. But like, they shoot Bond in the middle of the I forget the bunkadoo or whatever they call it. And
right.
It was it was very bad in terms of like they shot him in the leg and then he's just not at all impacted by that, except like an occasional shot or two where he's kind of limping. But for the most part, like he is just running after having been shot in the leg and leaving this blood trail everywhere he goes. And they were at least they get the upper hand on Bond enough, and Bond's like allies, like Paula, obviously, like they take Paula out. That like she, I think, was more formidable than anything than anything like Largo really did. Especially like given their like the research, like Largo has like a compound full of henchmen chasing Bond down and stuff like that,
sure.
Or fighting against the Coast Guard. She kind of like borrows Vargas and one of the others or a couple of the others or whatever. Also, again, on the pettiness, after she's dead, Bond just like setting her down and saying like she's really dead or whatever, like whatever the line is. Not even
even if she has a rest, she's real dead.
Yeah,
she's really dead.
Yeah, not even like she's dead tired or something. Like she's she's dead. Just like not even a double entendre really. Just
I thought a lot about that scene. I'll have you know when I watch it this morning.
Mm-hmm.
like I spent probably like a good 5 minutes as the movie went on, which is again maybe not a great indictment of the movie itself. When I spent 5 minutes thinking about something that I wasn't watching, where I was just like, man, that couple. Like first of all, I was like, how long do they wait before they go? Like, are you okay or like that? And then in their mind, this man walked over, dropped this girl's body off with a bullet hole in the back, said she's dead, and left. They're 100% thinking this man just murdered this woman and dropped her body off. Like, there's like no doubt in my mind. Like, they're definitely like, man, they think James Bond just killed this woman, and like it's that weird.
Yeah, it's a good thing Bond goes off on the scuba quest for the nukes and stuff, because there is absolutely a manhunt on for this man who killed this woman going on around Nassau the next day.
And tried to dump her body at a dance club. Yeah, it is a crazy because he like hides the bullet hole like expertly, right? And like he's hiding that, and like you kind of see he does that, and then you like cover it up again.
Like that was one of those great. Like the note I made was like, oh, they shot her in the back through his hand, because like the first scene we see is like he's already covering it up or whatever. Yeah. And then like because he's basically been the squib. So yeah, it was just like that was another. I wish that had been shot a little bit better.
So like, but he's like acting like she wasn't dead, and like he could put her body literally anywhere. Like literally put her in a bathroom, put her in any hiding spot, and it is less egregious than dropping her off at a table with people there and then walking away and be like, that man's a murderer. Yeah. That man, like, also, it is such a bizarre scene.
The fact that like the four henchmen that are around that like cabana with like one of whom they clearly see that they did not actually kill Bond. They're just like, whoops. I guess we'll go back to Largo.
Killed her. We're gonna bounce. Yeah, that's gonna not go over well. Yeah, it is. Yeah, we'll have Largo currently in 4th place on the villains corner list, behind Art Goldfinger taken number 1, Red Grant in 2nd, Odd Job in 3rd.
Would you put
Emilio Largo in 4th?
Would you put Volpe on this?
I don't know. Like, do we want to put Volpe on the list? Do you think is she list worthy? What are we thinking? Should be on the list?
I mean, like, it's.
She's a weird henchman because she's like she's only in like the second act essentially. She's not like in it the entire movie like Odd Job and Red Grant were. That was my thing.
Yeah, I get. I mean, well, she's in the opening, like, so she's in the first couple acts, but she's not dealing with like Bond Vargas in the first couple. Yeah, like the main in the first act. Yeah,
like henchman even. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's fine. Like in the same way that like Odd Job was Goldfinger's number 2, I was looking at her as Largo's number 2. Basically, like the fact that they have that whole like
Vargas, you could kind of argue is like his like henchman guy too.
Yeah, but I mean, like we had that there's that scene between Largo and Volpe at the resort where they're like shooting the clay pigeons and stuff like that. Again, with a helicopter of Felix Leiter and Bond just like blatantly like spying on them,
just vibing. Yeah. Yes, Largo is 4th, Rosa Klebb is 5th, and Dr. No is 6th. Rosa Klebb, by the way, should be mentioned. Really great. I liked her a lot. That ranking is a little bit of a disservice to Rosa Klebb. We already went over all of the Q-Lab gadgets, but are there any particular favorites of yours from the movie, Trevor?
Like the other joke I made was when they give Bond that like giant backpack thing underwater that like has like the multi harpoon launcher or whatever. I made the joke that he has to basically shoot like, because it's that, and it's also like an underwater jetpack kind of thing, right? Where like it shoots him across the water a lot quicker than like everybody else. So I made the joke that he basically has to control that in the same way that Boba Fett has to control his jetpack and like use the rocket launcher by just like leaning over and having it shoot past his head, which is just awkward.
It's a weird gadget movie. I mean, it's definitely the second best gadget movie because there are lots of gadgets, right? Although I stand by that I really love Commercial Love's attaché briefcase thing. But this one you're getting like a lot of cool stuff. I like, it should be said, the kind of initial idea behind like the tracking pill is like a cool idea. I think that like I don't know if I'd seen before when I watched this. I will always say Domino getting caught with the camera Geiger counter is one of the most ridiculous things in the entire movie. I think that entire sequence is insane. How bad of a spy she is. Where basically she like starts doing it, immediately runs into Largo, and he's like, "What are you doing? I thought I'd you to stay inside." And she's like, "Oh, I'm just like out taking pictures in the hallway." And he's like, "Where did you get the camera?" And she's like, "In town." And then like he like grabs her, and she just like immediately fucking chucks it at the ground and like smashes it. Like it is just a bad spy job all around, Domino. You get some poor marks on that.
I mean, it's also, I will also say like not the most for a stealth type of spy having this thing that does like loud clicking, loud beeping or whatever is not really
the
operating
scenario.
In your favor, Q. So I feel like you could have gone back to the drawing board on that one a little bit.
Fair enough. He's got a good batting average otherwise. So that takes us, Trevor, to the final review for Thunderball. What are your final thoughts and feelings on Thunderball?
Yeah, I mean, like I've said, this one was a rough one for me. There were like a few, highlights here and there, but by and large, this is probably like a C- for me. It's easily the bottom of my list. Below Dr.
Takes.
No.
All right.
Yeah, I was not a fan of this one.
All right. I totally, man. I respect that, man. Yeah, I mean, I think Thunderball is, I think like a C, right? Like a 7 out of 10 is totally perfect for a Thunderball movie. I think for me, it's my third favorite that we've done so far, right? I have it above Dr. No and below From Russia with Love, right? It would be third on my list. Right, like I really loved Thunderball as a kid. We've talked about before, right? And then eventually it kind of slowly started to fall in my rankings for a lot of reasons.
I did want to highlight, like, you mentioned it that early on of like, you really love this as a kid. I can very easily see like enjoying this more as a kid versus like watching it as a 36-year-old man for the first time.
It's interesting because I watched someone react to Thunderball, like on a YouTube video a little while ago, and it was their very first Bond movie they watched, and they were like, "Look, this movie's super flawed, but I'm still gonna give it an 8 out of 10 because I liked it and I watched it as a kid." And like, I do think Thunderball is a very kid-friendly Bond movie in that regard. It's like, yeah, it's ridiculous and kind of silly and over the top and jump the sharky, but that all sort of works as a kid, right? Like, I think it's better than Dr. No. Or certainly, I guess, I thought about this a lot when I was like, would I rather watch this or Dr. No? And I think ultimately, I'd rather watch this than Dr. No. And I like Dr. No too, should be said. I think there's even an argument to be made that Dr. No is a better movie than Thunderball. I'm not entirely unpersuaded by that, but I would rather watch this than Dr. No, by somewhat slim margins.
I would maybe rather watch the first hour of this if I didn't have to watch the second hour of this movie than Dr. No. But other than that,
I don't think, and again, I don't think Dr. No is bad
Yeah.
at all. I think Dr. No is going to end up in probably the top half of our Bond ranking. Half of 25 is like 12 and a half. So maybe not. That might be ambitious, but it'll end up in like the top 15 Bond movies, I think. Like Dr. No, I think is still good. But yeah, I mean, I think Thunderball just has a bit more working for me. But also, like, I don't know. I can go back and forth on that. That's pretty fluid. But for me, Thunderball is third, which means for the very first time, me and Trevor's rankings look a little bit different, with Trevor, to kind of catch y'all up, having Goldfinger, From Russia with Love, Dr. No, and Thunderball being his top 4 so far. And me matching Trevor with the top 2 of Goldfinger and From Russia with Love, and then having Thunderball third and Dr. No fourth. We have our first disagreement. I'm very excited to see how it continues to play out from here. Otherwise, that's the show. Thank you for watching. If you like what you heard, you can go over to thatnerdysite.com and check out all the latest reviews, features, op-ed, all the fun gadgets and goodies over there, including all of the podcasts we have also go live on thatnerdysite.com. You can also go check out youtube.com/thatnerdysite, where you can catch all kinds of great video content, including this exclusive YouTube video series. Go check it out there. Leave some comments below and tell us your thoughts. Tell us if we're wrong or right on Thunderball, and if you liked it more or less than us. I'm very curious. People have weirdly strong thoughts about this one. And like and subscribe with the videos as well. Also go over to your podcast service around the globe, rate and review us on iTunes, leave those 5-star ratings, and tell us what you liked over there. Otherwise, you can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trevor, anything that you want to plug or shout out?
Yeah, I mean, we're as we continue to kind of pre-record these before we're launching the series, it's tough to kind of like time out what we'll be doing, but check out our end of the year, game of the year content from our 2021 stuff, which theoretically should be out long before this at this point. But yeah, go check out all that fun stuff. I'm sure they were very fun, exhilarating conversations around our favorite games of 2021.
Yes, I believe this will be January 22nd when you're listening to this, if I'm looking at the calendar correctly. And in which case, yeah, you can go find me at LeftyLogie, at LeftyLoggy, Loggy. Go check out all the Game of the Year, End of the Year content. Will probably have a Films of the Year list for myself. And then I will also be writing a written review feature for each of the movies as well. I've already got 2 of those knocked out for the first 2 films as of recording this. By the time you listen to this, obviously I'll have 4 done. That you can go check out as well. And yeah, go do all of that fun stuff. By the time you listen to this, you might also have gotten something out of me, Frank, Cam, and Trevor all doing stuff in Phoenix together. Who knows what we might kind of come up with, some sort of special Disney Plus viewing or whatever. And yeah, so go stay tuned to all of that content over there at That Nerdy Site. Otherwise, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site all across the internet. For myself, for Trevor, for all of us here at That Nerdy Site, thank you for watching. And That Bond Show will return with my favorite, You Only Live Twice.